Hello everyone. Today not today, a few days ago, I was tasked with, somebody had approached me and asked me if I could rehouse their Ibanez TS5 tube screamer. So I thought, yeah, it shouldn't be too hard. I had a look at the inside. Nothing super complicated, at least doesn't look like it. So I decided to sort of document my process. So if any of you guys are trying to rehouse this in particular or other pedals, like maybe a Behringer or something, I thought it'd be a good thing to have just to show you what goes into it, I guess, and some of the problems you might encounter. Um, because I've never actually done this before, so I thought it'd be a good learning experience. So again, I wanted to document my process to show you what I'm going to go through and give you guys an idea of what to expect. Um, anyway, should be interesting and hopefully fun. So let's go. All right, so as you can see here, I've got the board out. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how to disassemble it because it's pretty straightforward, pretty obvious. The only thing I will say is that the knobs on the Soundtank itself, the knobs they go in like that, but when you remove them, you just have to pull them straight off. And be careful because there's these little plastic rings that like to fly out and get everywhere that just go like that. So be aware. But yeah, you just pull them straight out or straight off of the pots and they should come right out. If they stick, you'll just have to try to grab them with something like, I don't know, maybe a pair of pliers or something, but make sure you have something around them to keep them from biting into the plastic. You know, simple things like that to remember. Anyway, so here's the board. And as I said, it's nothing too spectacular in terms of what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to desolder these 3 knobs so that I can put on some other knobs because I'm going to put it in a different enclosure, obviously. I'm going to take these jacks out and solder on some new ones because I think it's going to be side-mounted jacks for this, for the rehouse anyway. I really dislike top-mounted jacks personally, but I don't know. That's what I'm doing here. And I'm going to remove the power jack and replace it with something like this so that I can move it where I need it to go. Other than that, I'm not going to make any modifications to the board itself. If you look online, there are plenty of modifications that can be done to this because most, if not all of the tube screamer circuits are extremely similar. And this one, in fact, I'm reliably informed, is an exact copy of the TS9 tube screamer, the only difference being the op amp itself and a couple of parts that aren't involved in the sound path. So and so I won't even be replacing the op amp because the guy that brought this to me likes the way it sounds, so he doesn't want it changed. The other issue that many of these pedals have is this switch for the foot switch. It's just a momentary switch. What tends to happen is that as the pedal ages and you stomp on it, it doesn't latch. So you'll stomp on it and it'll come on for a brief second, but when your foot comes off, it goes back off again. And I did a little bit of research, and apparently that's due to one of these capacitors here not being quite high enough to maintain the circuit. So you have to keep pressing it until it stays on, kind of thing. The fix for that is just to get a slightly higher value capacitor in there. So I will be doing that because he did say that this has that issue. So, but I will be replacing the switch anyway with a momentary stomp switch. So I'll be replacing the switch anyway, but I will also be, and I believe, you can't quote me on this because again, I'm just an amateur. So from what I have read, you're supposed to follow the traces on the foot switch, and eventually they will lead you to a capacitor that jumps to ground. Now in this case, it's this capacitor here, C3, which is 102, which is 1 nanofarad, I believe, and we're going to bump that up to a 10 nanofarad. So we'll just desolder the old one, solder this one in. But yeah, that's the only modification I'm going to be making. Everything else will remain the same, just movable. So the pots are all going to be the same value. They'll just be, you know, this style of pot, so that I can move them where I need them in the enclosure. And the jacks will be this kind, again, so that I can move them where I need them to be. But other than the switch modification there, everything else is going to remain stock. So I'm going to start desoldering stuff now. Oh, and one other thing I forgot to mention. Just a moment. Let's see if I can see this. So, this is a Hammond style 1590B sized enclosure. Now, when you look at the Soundtank, it doesn't really look much bigger than that. It looks around the same size. But, as you can see, it's both taller and wider than a 1590B sized enclosure. So, the circuit board is also taller and wider. So I was hoping to just put it in this, because it looks at first glance that it would fit in here, but it won't. And the unfortunate thing is the 125B sized enclosures also are too small for this. Not by much. Now I suppose if you were like handy with or you know, if you had a belt sander or something that you could trim down the edges just enough to make it fit, you could probably squeeze this into a 125B. But I've opted for the 1590BB sized, not just because it will actually fit the board, although I am going to have to remove just a little bit on the bottom edge to get it to fit inside, because it's just not quite enough. So I'm going to remove like a millimeter, I think, on the bottom in order to get it to fit. But as you can see, there's lots of room on the sides, so that's not an issue. But yeah, you're going to need a bigger enclosure than you think, I believe, for this project. And again, if you're handy with like tools and you can remove some of the edges of the board to make it fit, you just have to be careful that you're not removing anything that needs to be there. So word of caution there. But yeah, I've gone for the 1590BB sized enclosure for this, just because that's the one that's going to fit it easiest. So moving along. Alright, so as you can see here, we've got the switch out. I made the modification, so hopefully the switch will work better. So the C3 was bumped up from a 1 NF to a 10 NF right here. And it might be different if you want to try this on your TS5 or any of the other Soundtank pedals. It might be a different capacitor than C3, but I believe on this particular one, it's C3. So hopefully that'll work fine. I've also gone ahead and removed the old LED, and I left the wires there because I'll just run them to the new LED. You won't need a resistor or anything because that's already taken care of through here. Left the battery clip on because why not? We can either there should be room in the new enclosure for a battery, but I'm not too sure yet. Either way, we'll leave it there, and if we can use it, we'll use it. If not, it'll just be there. It'll just be in the way, I guess. Anyway, so we've removed all the pots, the two jacks, and the power jack relatively cleanly. Of course, you want to be careful with all this stuff. Try not to lift any pads. You know, try to remove as much solder as you can before you start prying and pulling on things. It just makes your life a whole lot easier not having to repair anything here. Like, this looks a little messy, but it's really, come on, there we go. This looks a little messy here, but all the pads are intact. Everything is fine. So, at this point, if you're not too familiar with this stuff, I'm questioning why you're even watching this, but if you're like me and you know a little bit, you know enough to be dangerous, you'll probably want to find out which wires you're going to need to run for the jacks and the power jack. So all you need for that is a multimeter, and you set it to continuity so you can find out what goes where. Now in this case, this top part here is power. So when you run the wires to the new jack, this will be your straight power. This side one here, as you can see, it runs here, which is the red wire on the battery cable. So that's going to be your battery power. And then this pad here is going to be ground. So you know that if you use your continuity check, you can make sure you have all that right, so that when you hook up the new power jack, the ground, of course, should be the center lug of your new power jack. So anyway, the pots will all be the same. I mean, they were installed this way, and as you know, if they're installed this way, the pins are from left to right, 1, 2, and 3. And it's the same on these. So if I were to install this, that's pin 1, that's pin 2, that's pin 3. So they'll correspond there. That's easy enough to understand. The switch, as you can see here, the old switch has 4 legs on it, but it functions as a single pull, single throw, which is what this is. This is the switch I'll be replacing it with. So as you can see on the board, on the back of the board where the switch was, the 2 bottom pads are connected together, which just goes to the ground plane, and the 2 top pads are connected together, which means you can just run one SP-ST switch like this for the same function. So we're going to hook that up the same way. And as far as the input and output jacks go, one of them is going to be just a regular mono jack like this. So there's only 2 leaves. And the other one is going to be a stereo jack. So as you can see, there's 3, tip, ring, and sleeve. Now on this, they were both stereo jacks. So you can see there's tip, ring, and sleeve on both of these. But if you look on the back here, here's this will be the input jack, I think. Yeah. So this side is your input jack. So you'll have one of these here. If you trace it out, this is the ground, so this is the sleeve on both jacks. Now you're probably wondering, well, which one's tip and which one's ring? So if you look here, the ground wire to the battery connects to this leg of the input jack. That means that's going to be your ring connection, that's going to be your tip. So here, this little blob here is the battery cable. So that's your ring connection, that's your tip connection. And on the output jack, you can see one of them doesn't connect to anything. So you can get away with using a mono jack, which just has the 2. So your tip here and your ring there. So, or your tip and your sleeve rather. So this is going to be your sleeve, this is going to be your tip, and you can leave that unconnected because it doesn't connect to anything anyway. So yeah, that's where we stand right now. So at this point, I think I'm going to start looking at locating things on the new enclosure, figuring out where I want things to be, drilling the holes, and then mounting everything and just reconnecting everything. So I'll see you in a little bit. Alright, so first problem I've come across. Now, as I said, we've desoldered everything that we needed to desolder. And I trimmed down the bottom of the board a bit so I could fit it into the enclosure easily. I just have it marked off with black tape there because as you can see the bottom there's a ground plane and there's only a little bit of board before you hit the ground plane, so I was into the ground plane and I didn't want it touching against the board. That's all. So as you can see here, I've pre-mounted my new switch and my pots. Now when I lay this in there, the problem becomes that it's too high. I don't have the original jacks I was going to use. Anyway, I can't put jacks on the side because there's no room for them, or at least not the type I was going to use, the open jacks. So there's no room for them on the sides. Can't fit them in on top because it doesn't go down far enough for me to use them there. So what to do? Well, the plan is that I'm going to use these jacks, which are enclosed just like the old ones are, only these have a nut on the end so that I can mount them. What I'm going to try to do is set them underneath the board like that, so that when the board sits on top, now the jacks will still have a place to go and the board will still be low enough that the cover will fit. Don't worry about those transistors sticking up. They can be bent over if need be, but I don't think they'll need to be. It's just a little wobbly right now. So that's the new plan. I'm going to mount the jacks underneath on the side like that and just run wires up to these 3 points and it should be good. So the only other thing to do now is figure out where I want to put the power jack. I was originally going to put it on top here in between the two pots, but again the board's in the way, so I don't think I'll be doing that. Although no, I won't be doing that. There's just not enough room for me to mount that jack there, so I will likely be mounting it on the side just like the jacks. So I'll be using this style power jack. So hopefully, as you can see here, the way it's going to fit in, the board won't touch it. Whereas if I was using an internal mount jack, this one's sort of an external one, but if I was using an internal one, it would be more like that. There would be a lot more sticking inside, whereas this one should be good. So again, I think we're going to put it on the side, probably above the the pads for the wires are there, so it makes sense to sort of put it on this side. But a lot of power jacks that are side mounted are mounted on the input side. So that's probably what I'll do instead, just for ease. Mount it over here, like that. Run the wires up to the pads, and it should be good. So, yeah, we'll go with that. I'm going to mount the jacks probably down near the bottom, like somewhere around here. And then that will leave me room for the power jack above it. Anyway, those are my thoughts at this time. I will come back when I've got it all figured out. All right, so I think I'm happy with how this turned out. We've got the jacks comfortably underneath the board, with it still having room for the top. All the pots are there, and the power jack fits comfortably over there with nothing in the way. So, yeah, I think that will work out good. I'll just have to run the wires now. The only real issue, and it's not an issue, it's just more of an aesthetic thing. There's two of them, actually. Number one is I had to mount the jacks very high up on the enclosure like that to give me the clearance needed. So, and it looks odd with the power jack like that, but that's where I needed to put that because it's so large. So those are kind of, you know, they're ugly, but they function. But the worst is this. That switch is very high up. I don't like it being that high up, but unfortunately I need the clearance, and it's just a very soft push button switch, so hopefully that won't be too much of an issue. And I've got a hole there for the LED, which will go right down there, and I'll just trim these wires, run them to the LED, and that'll be that. So next up is just running all the wires. And as you can see, I've disconnected the battery wires because there's no room for a battery in here, so I just got rid of those. But yeah, on to the wiring. Alright, so here we are at this point. So I've got the pots wired up with small pieces of wire so that I can move them if I need to. Now you have to remember, of course, that on this, where I'm going to be putting this the opposite way from how it was mounted in the plastic enclosure. So you have to make sure the orientation of your pots is correct. That's all I'm saying. And the same thing with the in and out jacks. They're going to be reversed, sort of. So that's why I color code my wires, so that I know white is output and green is input. So that's all. And again, the switch is just 2 wires to those pads because both those pads are connected together anyway. So easy. And I've trimmed the wires for the LED so I can just attach them to a new LED. And of course, I've got the power and ground wires up here, and they should be long enough to run to the new power jack that I have, and I believe it's on this side. Anyway, yeah, I just cut off the excess wires for the LED and use them for the power and ground, because why not? So yeah, at this point I highly recommend you test it first, so that if there is a problem, you can go back through your wiring and it's already out of everything. You don't have to worry about unmounting anything. So you can find problems if need be, but I've already tested this and it works perfectly. And that must have been the right capacitor for the switch, because every single switch worked every time. So all that's left to do now is actually wire up the input and output jacks, wire up the LED, wire up the power jack, and then install everything in the enclosure. So I'll show you that when it's finished. Alright guys, just a minor update. I found that once I reassembled everything and tried it in the enclosure, that it still wasn't switching properly. So I tried a few things, did some more research, and it seems like I do have the right capacitor, C3 in this case. And again, it's supposed to be the capacitor that runs from the switch, usually through a resistor, in this case R3, and then through a capacitor to ground. in this case C3. Again, it'll be different on other Soundtank pedals, might even be different on other TS5s, I'm not sure. That's why you have to check. So C3 is the correct capacitor. However, the stock value is 1 nanofarad. I put it up to a 10 nanofarad and was still having switching problems. So after doing some more research, I found that you can just keep upping it, and apparently until the problem goes away. I saw one guy he changed the capacitor for 100 nanofarad, and it worked perfectly. So I went with a 47 nanofarad here, and it seems to have solved the switching issues with this pedal. So if you bump yours up to a 10 nanofarad and it's still not working, try going a little higher. So anyway, back to assembly. Okay, so with that all finished, let's just plug it in and make sure that it all still works. I'm going to call that finished. So that's how I rehoused this Ibanez TS5 tube screamer. So hopefully it gave you a little bit of insight on what to expect anyway. All in all, it was kind of fun. I enjoyed it. Kind of wish I could have fit it in something smaller, but just wasn't to be this time. So thanks for watching, guys, and take it easy. I'll see you next time.